Christopher Nolan isn't shy about his love of James Bond, but if you pay close attention to his films, it goes much deeper than that.
The influence of those movies on my filmography is embarrassingly apparent.
And that's because, depending on how you look at it, Nolan has ripped off, stolen, or paid homage to several scenes and elements from the Bond films over the course of his filmography, saying, "I've been plundering ruthlessly from the Bond movies in everything I've done. They're a huge influence on me." So let's dive in and take a look at all of the times Christopher Nolan borrowed from James Bond. The opening to The Dark Knight Rises features one of Nolan's most jaw-dropping sequences, showcasing a daring mid-air hijacking of a CIA plane that sees the aircraft get physically inverted. And considering Nolan's penchant for using practical effects whenever possible over CGI, it makes this sequence all the more impressive. But if you're wondering where Nolan got the idea for this sequence, then look no further than the opening sequence to License to Kill, which sees Bond rappel out of a helicopter and attach a hook and cord to drug lord Sanchez's plane that, exactly like in The Dark Knight Rises, sees the aircraft get physically inverted. It's important to point out, though, that Nolan still uses CGI, but only to augment practical effects that are done in camera. And he does this because, frankly, not only does it look better than CGI, but when it comes to stunts, when you know people are actually risking their lives and safety, it makes you that much more emotionally invested in what you're watching. And it's part of the reason why so many of the stunts from the old Bond films still hold up today, because they're real stunts and not actors in front of a blue screen. And from watching Nolan's films, it's clear that he's been directly inspired by this, as he consistently opts for real stunts and practical effects over CGI whenever possible, with many joking before Oppenheimer came out that he planned to detonate a real atomic bomb. While we're on the topic of airplanes, in The Dark Knight, Lau flees Gotham for Hong Kong in order to avoid arrest.
Batman has no jurisdiction. He'll find him and make him squeal.
In order to bring Lau back to Gotham, Batman travels to Hong Kong, infiltrates his office, beats up his goons, and then kidnaps Lau, escaping the police by using a surface-to-air recovery system known as Skyhook. The same stunt also appeared at the end of Thunderball, which saw Bond and that film's Bond girl, Domino, adrift in the ocean after successfully thwarting Largo's sinister plot of demanding a substantial ransom to prevent the detonation of 2 stolen nuclear bombs over major Western cities. And while most Bond films at this time saw James willingly foregoing rescue in favor of an intimate encounter with the leading lady, Thunderball subverted audiences' expectations by having Bond use the Skyhook system to get him and Domino rescued in exhilarating fashion. One of the hallmarks of almost every Bond film are his gadgets, and a scene that we see in nearly every movie involves Bond visiting Q Branch prior to departing on his mission to get the custom gadgets that Q has created for him to aid him in the field. Not only do these scenes see Q explaining to Bond how to operate these new toys, but they always feature a snarky back and forth between the two characters.
Think we understand each other?
Grow up, 007.
While Lucius Fox appears in the comics, his characterization there is that of a talented businessman, with Bruce creating his gadgets himself. But with Nolan's desire to ground his Batman film in logic and the real world, and to answer the practical question of,
Get those wonderful toys.
Nolan turned Fox into Bruce Wayne's very own version of Q, with Wayne Enterprises' Applied Sciences division acting as his version of Q Branch, supplying Bruce with weapons, gadgets, vehicles, and armor for him to use when he fights crime. And because of that, not only do all 3 Nolan Batman films feature a scene with Fox introducing Bruce to a bunch of new gadgets,
well, let me show you some stuff anyway.
but they also feature charming banter between the two characters, reminiscent of the exchanges between Bond and Q.
Perhaps you should read the instructions first.
Speaking of Fox, one of the main toys he supplies Bruce with is the Tumbler, aka the Batmobile. And while obviously Nolan didn't invent the Batmobile, how he uses it in Batman Begins is awfully reminiscent of how Bond uses the DB5. Not only do Batman and Bond get their vehicles from Fox and Q respectively, but both are fitted with an array of weapons and gadgets, which has led to numerous adrenaline-pumping chase scenes in the films of both characters, where they use the tech that's been incorporated into their vehicles to gain an advantage over their enemies. Ironically, the Tumbler chase in Batman Begins almost never happened, as Nolan originally didn't intend to feature the Batmobile in the movie at all, considering it too fanciful for his grounded approach to the character, and assuming that whoever made the sequels would introduce it. However, when he asked the studio if there was anything they wanted to see in the film, they said the Batmobile.
Once I'd heard that from the studio, they weren't imposing it. but it was clear that just emotionally, it wasn't going to be Batman for them without the Batmobile.
Nolan's Bond influences aren't just limited to his Batman films, however, as the third dream level that Cobb and his team jump to in Inception takes place on a snow-covered mountain featuring a heavily guarded fortress. As the team skis and rappels down the mountain, they're forced to fight off defensive projections as they try to infiltrate the fortress. Adding to their troubles is an avalanche before they eventually complete their mission and blow up the fortress. If this entire sequence seems incredibly familiar, it's because it was lifted directly out of Nolan's favorite Bond film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which, just like Inception, sees Bond infiltrate Blofeld's mountain fortress in the Swiss Alps. Both films feature a ski chase, a raid on the fortress, an avalanche, and finally end with the destruction of the fortress. Another trademark of Bond films is the inclusion of numerous exotic locations that the secret agent visits in each installment. For example, Die Another Day sees Bond in North Korea, Hong Kong, Cuba, London, and Iceland. In the case of Inception, Christopher Nolan aimed to do the same thing, and even described Inception as my Bond film. Throughout the movie, we witness Cobb's global journey within both reality and dreams, as he visits Paris, Tokyo, Mombasa, New York, Los Angeles, and wherever the snow fortress was supposed to be, which was filmed in Canada. Furthermore, many of Nolan's protagonists share characteristics reminiscent of Bond. Bruce Wayne, Cobb, and John David Washington's character in Tenet are handsome, well-dressed, charming Bond-like characters. Washington's character in particular, former CIA operative with no name and little to no backstory, is as close to a Bond character Nolan could get without being sued.
Just tell me if you've slept with my wife yet.
No. Not yet.
And like Bond, he's sardonic, resourceful, and adept at hand-to-hand combat. He also embarks on a high-stakes mission that involves espionage, international intrigue, and a threat that could have catastrophic global consequences. The film also features a villain hell-bent on world destruction, making Tenet essentially a Bond film for the modern era, complete with its own unique time-bending twist. While every Bond film features a Bond girl, several of them feature two who often switch allegiances throughout the course of the film. We've seen them start off bad, like Pussy Galore, before succumbing to Bond's irresistible charm and switching sides, and we've seen them start off as allies like Miranda Frost, only to turn on Bond later in the film as they reveal their true allegiance to the film's villain. The women in The Dark Knight Rises do the same thing. Catwoman starts off as a morally ambiguous character who's not only a thief, but also betrays Batman, serving him up on a silver platter to Bane. Eventually, by the end of the film, Bruce is able to convince her to switch sides and help him liberate Gotham from the clutches of Bane and his goons. And speaking of Bane, Miranda Tate starts off the film as Bruce's lover and confidant, before not only betraying him and revealing that she's in cahoots with Bane, but also that she's the mastermind behind the entire operation, with Bane being subservient to her. This is incredibly similar to The World Is Not Enough, which sees Electra King go from Bond girl to Bond villain, eventually revealing that, like Miranda Tate, aka Talia al Ghul, she's the true mastermind behind the operation, with Renard nothing but a disfigured henchman in love with and subservient to her. Besides Nolan's love of Bond, if his Batman films seem heavily influenced by The Secret Agent, it's because rumors suggest that originally his pitch for a gritty reboot of The Caped Crusader was meant for Bond, and when that fell through, Nolan took the same approach and applied it to Batman. The irony, of course, is that Casino Royale would end up taking its cues from Batman Begins, and was clearly heavily inspired by Nolan's grounded approach to rebooting Batman. But the similarities don't end there, as Skyfall would then be heavily inspired by The Dark Knight, with even the film's director, Sam Mendes, openly acknowledging this influence, with one of those similarities being a Joker-like villain who deliberately gets captured as part of their master plan. It seems almost poetic how Nolan's love of Bond has influenced his films so deeply, and with the success of his films, it's resulted in the Bond films now borrowing from him. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.